Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this session, Powerful Digital Solutions Using Microsoft Graph, Low Code, and AI for Contextual Data. My name is Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenter to answer live. This session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours. With that, I'll turn it over to Lewis. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Anna. This is really exciting. We've gone through, I think, 3 episodes now of this series on activating contextual data with Microsoft Graph, Power Platform, and AI and Copilot, different things like that. This is the final session today, everyone. So today, we are going to talk through powerful digital solutions using contextual data with Microsoft Graph, Low Code, and AI. We're going to kind of bring everything together. We started by talking about really Power Platform sort of focused topics. We looked at almost like an introduction to Power Platform, working with connectors and calling APIs and stuff like that. And that was, that first sort of level 100 introduction to low code in the Microsoft space. Then we spent session 2 looking through, that concept of contextualized data and Microsoft Graph and how we can extract data from, the Microsoft 365 sort of space, how we can extend Microsoft 365 and how we can push data out of Microsoft 365 for more enterprise analytics scenarios. And then in the last session, we pulled those 2 first ones together where we looked at Power Platform and Microsoft Graph as better together friends, and we built solutions that use data in that contextualized manner to drive and enhance user experience, to enable users to make decisions, at a much quicker pace that were more effective in the long term. And so today we're going to take a look at the concept of Microsoft Copilot and some of the different Copilots that exist, and we're going to pull the 3 different things together into this summary session on powerful digital solutions using contextual data with Microsoft Graph, Low Code, and AI. So to give you a bit of a recap, or in case you haven't checked out any of the previous episodes, I would recommend doing that, by the way, everyone. If you check out the YouTube playlist for this series, I will post it on LinkedIn after. You can check out this via YouTube if you're watching it on there right now. I would really recommend taking a look at the previous 3 episodes in the series, perhaps before you watch this one, if you'd like that background context, or if you're fairly familiar with Power Platform, Microsoft Graph, contextualized data concepts, feel free to stay watching this one today. But if you need that background context, those 3 other episodes will be really helpful for you. But if you have watched those, this may not help you so much, but if you haven't, just to give you a recap on who I am Lewis. I am a Power Platform customer success architect working in the Microsoft partner world. I have technology and product expertise across Microsoft 365, Power Platform, and Copilot. I am a dual Microsoft MVP in both the Microsoft 365 category and the business applications category. In the Microsoft 365 category for my work around Microsoft Graph and contributions around that technical space, and in the Biz Apps category for my contributions around Power Apps. And then I am the author of Lewis Does Dev, which some of you may be familiar with as Low Code Lewis, where last year I wrote 365 posts in 365 days. I won't do it again. It wasn't a good idea. It was kind of crazy, but lessons learned. I am one of the co-chairs of Bletchley Park AI and Microsoft User Group. Check us out. Come to one of our sessions. We run online every now and again and are more based in person in Bletchley Park. And there's a bunch of other stuff on the screen that you can check out right now. Scan my QR code or connect with me via my Linktree and LinkedIn, X, and different platforms like that if you'd like to stay in touch. If you have any questions that you don't feel like putting in the chat today, then feel free to ping me with those after the session. But I would really encourage you to put those in the comment section as well today, because it may help someone else out that needs some support with that thing that you're wondering about as well, but might not be so comfortable in putting that in the chat. So feel free, please use that chat space. We will answer questions as we go through. And yeah, we will dive into an agenda. So we're going to recap on everything covered so far in the series in a bit more detail. I know we've talked about, already some of the things that we covered off in the series, but we will go over some of those concepts again. We will explore the world of generative AI and Microsoft Copilot. And we will take a closer look at Copilot for Microsoft 365, take a look at the extensibility elements of Copilot for Microsoft 365. We'll actually take a look at extending Copilot with connectors in Copilot Studio, and we'll summarize things together to end this series, with a wrap. Cool. So one of the first things that we talked about, and I think it was actually in the second episode of this series when we looked at things more relevant to Microsoft Graph, was the concept of contextualized data. Now, when I talk about contextualized data, I'm talking about representations of data whereby relationships between elements of that data that are connected but not explicitly represented are then uncovered and identified. So, we might have a scenario whereby we have organizations who are our customer, perhaps accounts, a table in Dynamics 365 of accounts, and we might have their, explicitly connected contacts or employees or orders or opportunities or leads or different things like that. And those are quite explicit relationships. We tie those things in an interface between that organization and that opportunity, that organization and that employee. And those are quite explicit relationships. When we're talking about contextualized data, we're talking about elements of data that aren't so explicitly represented, but more implicitly represented, that we then uncover and identify. And now some of the best ways that we can, surface contextualized data to drive and enhance user experience is when we almost have a primary focus of data. Perhaps it's something like someone that you want to chat with on Microsoft Teams. And then we surface a secondary piece of data alongside that in a contextualized manner. So in Microsoft Teams, an example of how that works is with presence in Teams. So you have the chat function in Teams where you go ahead and try and find someone to communicate with about a certain thing that you're going to need some help with. And then perhaps it turns out that there's 5 more people, that might be able to answer your query, but you're going to use a piece of contextualized data to determine which person might be the best person to get in contact with. And that's that small little icon that you have that's called presence in Teams. It tells you whether someone's available or on a call, on do not disturb, or away, or perhaps even out of office. Now, that secondary piece of data is being surfaced in a contextualized manner because it's the second focus alongside the primary piece of data, which is the person that you want to get in contact with. Now, that's really, really helpful because you don't have to go to a separate place to find out if that person's online. You don't have to go to their calendar to find out if they're available at the moment. It's that secondary piece of data that is pulled from an API or something like that, where we then surface it contextually by, with it being that second focus that adds value because we can suddenly make decisions much, much faster that are more impactful. We're not contacting someone that's offline. We're contacting people that are online that we found out straight away because we had a user experience that surfaced contextualized data. So if you want more of a recap on this topic, I'd check out session 2 in the playlist for this series, where we go more into this concept and look at how we can build solutions for Microsoft 365 or extend Microsoft 365 using Graph, where we can pull data points out of Graph that really build powerful sort of solutions where we've got contextualized data at play. So we talked about Graph, and some of those concepts around, the things that we learned in session 2 and how we can pull data points out of Graph to surface them in a contextualized manner to improve user experiences. But there's a bunch of different data points that we can use for this, kind of concept or idea. Now, this is already categorized. When we looked in session 2 with this, not so categorized, and I asked you some questions around different things that you might have ideas around data points that we can use contextually and that might enhance the user experience. I'm going to run through this really quickly again. Now, on the left, we have the idea of what I would consider digital ecosystem context. Now, we're talking about the things that live in our systems, the things that live in our databases, on our website, stuff like that. It's the stuff that we store in Teams. It's all of that subconsciously created data that we store in Outlook when we send Teams messages. The users that exist in our tenants and stuff like that we can capture from Microsoft Graph. It's perhaps IoT devices that are sensing the weight of something in a manufacturing scenario, or whether a door is open. It's customer data in CRM. It is that explicit sort of row by row type data. Perhaps it's business commercial data, maybe device information. So when you're an employee in an organization and you're handed a laptop when you start working at that organization, there's some information that ties that laptop to your organization using something called Microsoft Intune. Now, that's if you're working with Windows in your organization and things like that. But you've got that, there's that piece of data that perhaps we're not so aware about, and it's a bit more subconscious, but we can use very, very effectively in a contextualized manner. Perhaps it's stuff like room bookings or site information, whether I can get from building A to B effectively because I have the right accessibility tools to get to that place because of my accessibility need. And now that's something that I'd consider more operational context. It's not the stuff that lives in our digital system so much. It isn't the rows in Dynamics 365 or in Azure SQL or somewhere like that. It's actual things going on in the business that's more operational. Perhaps we're looking at things like employee skill sets or resource capacity, or even just the way that we operate in an organization, right? Our processes that we then use as context. I don't know if any of you are familiar with perhaps interfaces where you're almost guided down a process with a timeline on perhaps the left side of the screen or along the top with perhaps business process flows in Dynamics 365. That's taking a process and surfacing it in a user experience contextually so that it can support the primary focus, perhaps a step in that process that we are on. And that really enhances that user experience, gets the user ready for what's coming up next, different things like that. Perhaps it's out the window context. Perhaps we're looking at things like traffic information, economy data, what's in the news. Perhaps it's something like a major, digital vendor service has gone down. It's going to hit the news, but because we're using, news data effectively, we can have a trigger that says, oh, well, if that hits the news, we're going to find out straight away. And we should know about it before then, perhaps. But if it gets to the news, we're going to find out straight away before we're actually reached out to by those different people. Perhaps it's, a step before that. If major digital vendor services go down, we're going to need to know about that to handle it in our organization. And how do we use that piece of information contextually to determine, what we do next and the user experience that we surface to people? Perhaps it's things like, when I get in the car, I need traffic information as data used contextually to determine the route that I'm going to take and the route that Maps is going to select that I take to get me to work on time. And that's using that secondary piece of data contextually alongside a primary focus. The primary focus is me getting to work. How do I get there? The secondary piece of information is the traffic on that route and the traffic on a different route that then allows me to determine which route to take. And those are the things that speed up, that decision making, the things going on in our day to day, and different things like that that enhance not only a user experience with a device, but just a day to day experience of, getting to places on time or being able to make the right decisions effectively and different things like that. So those are some of the different concepts around contextualized data and how I would categorize some of these different data points into, three different categories around digital ecosystem context, operational context, and out the window context. That thinking much more broadly. Now, let's take a look at an example, right? Another example, we touched slightly on Maps. Siri suggestions is a really, really great example of how Apple use data contextually. Now, they don't just use data that perhaps you input to your iPhone or your iPad or an Apple Watch or something like that, but they almost take a look at what you do on a day-to-day and learn from the different things that you're doing with your device, the places that you're going and such like that. They look at those frequent user patterns and people patterns, and then they take automated triggers based on that data contextualized. So they take that contextualized user pattern data and they automate and enhance user experiences, enabling better decision making and actions faster. So if it's that I am getting in the car, it will tell me how to get to work on time. I don't even have to put the address in because it knows I go there 5 times a day already, right? Or 5 times a week already, sorry. It's learned that I do that thing every day. So it's learned that practice, And then it's going to use that piece of data contextually when I get in the car. That's the primary focus, getting into the car at that time. The secondary piece of focus is what I do on a day to day, what the common practice is. And it's going to use those pieces of information together to enhance the user experience and automate different things to happen that will enable me to make decisions faster, that lead to a better outcome. So it may be me getting to work on time. It may be me phoning someone that I commonly speak to that time every day. It may be me setting an alarm I'm commonly going to forget to do, but I need to have set up so that I get up on time for the next day when I actually have to go to work because it's been a weekend. It may be sending an email at the right time that I commonly do. And so that's what Apple do slightly differently, I find, is they take different user patterns and learn from them and then shape user experiences to those different things. Now, another example that we have is Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365, and we'll talk a lot more about Copilot in today's session. Now, Copilot uses contextualized data sourced from Microsoft 365 to ground large language model responses and enable transformed user workflows. So we talked a lot about Microsoft Graph in session 2 and earlier today. Now, Copilot uses that data. It pulls that data out of Microsoft Graph to ground the responses that are retrieved from a large language model before they're surfaced to you as someone prompting Microsoft Copilot. When we looked at, the release of ChatGPT and things like that by OpenAI, we had almost like a model and a product that had been trained on data from a certain period and beforehand, and had a couple of extra things in there. It didn't quite interact with the web and live data yet, didn't quite interact with plugins yet at that initial release. But Copilot does something slightly different to that. It, searches against the graph to begin with. It does some pre-processing almost steps, and then it sends off to the large language model. So we don't just get what the large language model knows about. Then we do some post-processing, and then we get the information back from Copilot. So there's a number of different steps to what Copilot does to return a response. So there's some really cool ways that Copilot uses data contextually as well. And it's that secondary focus, that additional piece of data, right, that Copilot pulls from Graph before it sends the prompt with that contextual data to the large language model for a response. So we keep talking about it. What is Microsoft Graph? Let's recap on this one quickly. So Microsoft Graph is the gateway to data and intelligence in Microsoft 365. Think of Graph as that API or that capability to pull data out of Microsoft 365, but also push data back into Microsoft 365 to enhance different 365 experiences. It provides a unified programmability model that you can use to access data in Microsoft 365, Windows, and enterprise mobility and security for the purposes of app building, experience extension, and data analysis. Now, there's a bunch of different components to Microsoft Graph that cover that app building point, that experience extension point, and that data analysis point. Now, the app building to begin with, we're looking at the component of Microsoft Graph there that is the Graph API. Now, that comes in both a REST API format and the ability to work with software development kits. And the Graph API effectively allows us to tap into a bunch of different data points that exist in Microsoft 365, such as the assignments in education environments that we set for students. It may be the Teams chats that we send. It may be the appointments that we have in our calendar and different things like that. And it allows us to pull that data out to use it in our own apps and experiences. Now, the second thing we have is that experience extension, where we're using Microsoft Graph connectors to ingest data to Microsoft 365 and index it. And that basically allows us to enhance different Microsoft 365 experiences like Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 or Microsoft Search or Context IQ in Outlook for the web. And it allows us to ingest our own data from things like Jira or DevOps or different places like that to enhance those different experiences. So you can actually now prompt Copilot or search using Microsoft Search and have results returned from your different data sources, such as Jira, such as Azure SQL, such as DevOps, and other places. And you can create those graph connectors as well with .NET. So if there's not one that exists out the box, you have the capability to build those connectors as well. And then finally, we have Data Connect, which basically allows us to push larger and bigger enterprise data sets for Microsoft 365, Outlook, Teams, Viva, different products like that. And we can push those out to places like Microsoft Fabric, Azure Synapse, and different data stores like that, so that we can then do more enterprise data analysis on those things. So those are the three different components to Microsoft Graph, right? We've got the REST API and SDKs for app building and experience building. We have experience extension, where we're looking at graph connectors and ingesting and indexing data into Microsoft 365. And then we have Data Connect, where we're looking at more enterprise data analysis by pushing out different data sets, like using data from Viva, Teams, and Outlook. So we're going to jump onto some different concepts that we haven't touched on so much now. And we're going to look at some more stuff around generative AI and the Copilot space. We focus majority on Power Platform and low code and Microsoft Graph and contextualized data to this point. And we're going to jump onto some of the fun stuff now, right? The stuff that everyone is hearing about, the stuff that we've been talking about really probably since early 2023, and some of the stuff that is really a bit of a buzz at the moment. Now, generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that can create new original content in response to natural language prompts. So that's me just typing, natural language, whatever it is, in English, in whichever language, into a GPT, into a large language model that will then respond with text, images, video, or even software code. It's basically, it's what it says on the tin, right? Is that generative, artificial intelligence. It produces things, right? It produces text, images, videos, and software code based on a natural language, English, or whichever language prompt that I give it. And that's really cool. That's really powerful and can be used in some fantastic ways. And the way that Microsoft have harnessed some of this stuff is with their suite of copilots. Now, Microsoft have come up with the product Microsoft Copilot, which is effectively an AI assistant that works everywhere you do and adapts to your needs. It can help you find information, create content, collaborate, and enhance your productivity and creativity with Microsoft 365 apps, Azure AI, and more. Now, there's a whole bunch of different copilots that exist, right? And now we're not just talking about things like Copilot for Microsoft 365. We're talking about copilots that exist in Azure. We're talking about Microsoft Designer. We're talking about Copilot for the web, or what you may have heard of before as Bing Chat. Now, there are a whole bunch of different copilots that Microsoft have got going on, right? We can use Copilot in Power Apps to enhance the experience and accelerate that process of developing applications. Now, low code was already around, for rapid application development and supercharging the speed at which we could build software. And Copilot and AI are providing a second layer almost to how we can supercharge and accelerate that speed to delivery, where what we began with was a Copilot that could almost produce a single table data schema and then generate an app that sat on top of it. Now, we've already come some steps beyond that, right? Microsoft have done further work where now we're able to use Copilot to build a multiple table data schema in Dataverse with different relationships and things like that. And then we can build an app on top of that with nothing more than natural language. We don't need to code. We don't need to drag and drop. We simply give it some description, and it can generate that table schema with various relationships between different data tables, store it in Dataverse, and then build out an application for us that's fully responsive and able to work on mobiles, tablets, and desktops. And that's just one of the Microsoft Copilots that exists in Power Apps, right? There are all of the additional Copilots that you can see on screen right now, including Windows Copilot, Copilot for Microsoft 365, Copilots in Azure, in Viva, and various other places. One of my favorites is actually Edge Copilot, which is sort of powered jointly between Copilot for Microsoft 365 and Copilot for the web, or what you may have known as Bing Chat. And you can toggle between those two experiences. But Copilot in Edge lets you do a whole bunch of different cool things. You could have a PDF open and ask it to summarize the PDF into 10 different points. You could do that with YouTube or Stream as well, and have a video open and ask Copilot to summarize that video content. It's really cool, and it really supercharges my productivity in getting the information that I need really quickly. That's one of my favorite Copilots, is Edge Copilot. Now, today we're going to focus a bit more closely on Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 is basically the generative AI assistant that helps you create, edit, and communicate in your Microsoft 365 apps, documents, and conversations. This is the Copilot that lives across PowerPoint, across Excel, OneNote, Microsoft Loop. It exists as what was previously called Business Chat and now is just Copilot in Teams. It exists alongside your meetings that you have going on a day-to-day basis in Teams. It knows about the appointments in your calendar. It knows about the emails that you've sent and that you've received. It's fantastic. And it uses all of those different data points contextually alongside that main thing that it's able to do, right? Converse with you as a user in natural language. But it's got all of those additional data points that it's using contextually to form a response and keep you well informed on your day. And that's what's really, really powerful about Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? It has all of that additional context from Microsoft Graph, from Microsoft 365, where you're able to use that when it comes to prompting it to do different things. Now, we're going to talk really, really quickly about how some of this actually works. Now, there's a bunch of different things going on with this, and we touched on it slightly earlier in the conversation. Now, when we're working with Copilot for Microsoft 365, we basically send prompts from Microsoft 365 apps or from Copilot in Teams, and we send those to Copilot, right? It's similar to what we would do with a product like ChatGPT, or something like that, where we were familiar with that sort of large language model experience and working with that on the web. Now, we send those prompts to Copilot, but it doesn't just send it straight to the large language model. We do some things before that. Now, the second step is for Copilot to access Microsoft Graph and Semantic Index for pre-processing. Now, when it does that, it's looking at things like emails, our files in SharePoint and OneDrive. It's looking at our meetings that we've been recently, any chats, calendars, or contacts that we have. Now, what I won't say is that Copilot for Microsoft 365 can access all of the data points that are accessible with, say, the Microsoft Graph REST API. That's not what it does. It accesses a limited set of data, such as our emails, files, meetings, chats, calendars, and contacts. So if you're looking to get data out of Copilot for something like the tasks that you're storing in Microsoft To Do, it doesn't quite do that out the box, but we'll get onto a topic later that sort of talks about how we can make Copilot access some of those different data points. Now, that's the pre-processing and almost like the first grounding stage complete. Now what Copilot does is it packages up your prompt and the data that it collected from Microsoft Graph and the pre-processing stage, and it sends it to the large language model, to Azure OpenAI. Now, what's really, really cool about this is that we're not just relying on OpenAI's service and ChatGPT as a separate place where our data will go to. So your data will stay inside of the data boundary that your tenant has. So Azure OpenAI has the capability to deploy those services into your data boundary, into your tenant. You don't need to have that data fly over your data boundary into other locations to be able to harness some of these capabilities. Now, what happens next is Copilot then receives that large language model response, similar to what we might receive from perhaps ChatGPT. And then we do some further post-processing around accessing Graph and Semantic Index again, and then Copilot will send the response back to us with what it could find. So it does a bunch of different things, right? It doesn't just send a prompt to a large language model and then return it to us. We're constantly, doing pre-processing and post-processing grounding where we're talking to Microsoft Graph and taking advantage of that different context and content. So, to get you a bit more familiar with perhaps some of the different things that we might use Microsoft Copilot for, these are some of the different things going on, right? So perhaps it's that I don't quite know what happened in a meeting that happened last week. Maybe I was multitasking during that session and I need to keep track of maybe any of the actions that were assigned to me or the things that I need to do out the back of that call. So I can say to Copilot for Microsoft 365, recap a meeting that happened last week, and I can give it the title of the meeting, and I can ask it to tell me any of the actions that are assigned to me. And Copilot will respond with all of the notes from that meeting summarized into some bullet points, as well as any actions that are assigned to me. Now, that's really, really, really powerful. I find that very, very powerful for scenarios where perhaps you get distracted during a call, or you are multitasking, or you don't know what was said 5 minutes ago. You can ask Copilot to support with any of those scenarios, and you can get the data that you needed without having to ask a colleague what was said 5 minutes ago, or what was said a week ago and that you should have already completed. You don't have to have those embarrassing scenarios anymore where you have to call on someone for help, but instead you can ask Copilot to help you out with those things. I find it incredibly helpful. Then it may be that someone sent me an email and wow, it's really, really long. There's a lot of content in this email. Perhaps there's like 10 different replies already because people have been working on a different time zone, and I've just woken up and now I'm reviewing all of the content, and it's very, very long, and it's going to take me a while to review. Now, Copilot doesn't just work in a way that we can prompt it to do things. There's also shortcuts that also exist around different Microsoft 365 products where Copilot is at play. And in Outlook, one of the capabilities that we have is the ability to summarize an email. And we just select summarize with Copilot to have this go to work. And then we will get that super long email thread with a bunch of different replies already in there, summarized by Copilot so that we can pick out the key points that we need to know about. I will let you review some of the other content on this slide. We're not going to dive through every different prompt that exists on this slide right now, but pause the live stream or the recording that you're catching up on at this point if you want to try out some of the prompts with Copilot for Microsoft 365 on the screen at the moment. Cool. So before we go any further, maybe there's perhaps people in the room that don't have Copilot yet. You don't have a Copilot license. You don't have Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, I want to do a quick demo to get you a bit more familiar with some of the concepts that we've been talking about. Now, what's really, really cool is a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, you could probably actually do in Copilot for the web, or what was previously known as Bing Chat. You don't need Copilot for Microsoft 365 for everything that we're going to talk about today. But that being said, we're going to jump into a bit of a demo around Copilot for Microsoft 365 right now. Let's just flick over to this content. Amazing. Cool. So now, there's a few different concepts to be aware of here. Now, we're going to touch on a concept around what's called Copilot extensibility in a moment. Now, you can access Copilot for Microsoft 365 in terms of the chat for Copilot in both Microsoft Teams and Microsoft365.com. Now, there's a couple of different things to be aware of around those different experiences. At the moment, at this stage in the release of Copilot, extensibility options primarily work in Microsoft Teams. So any plugins that you're building with Copilot Studio or Teams message extensions and things like that we'll touch on later during this session, you're going to need to use Copilot in Teams to be able to harness those different capabilities. In Microsoft365.com at this point, some of those aren't quite working just yet, and they're not rolled out just yet. So we're going to take a look at some of the different things that we can do with Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, I had a meeting for the user group that I co-chair a little while ago. It was the Bletchley Park AI user group, and we were meeting to discuss our strategy and different things coming up and actions that we needed to take to keep the user group running. Now, I've forgotten some of the things that I perhaps needed to do, and I'm going to say to Copilot, can you summarize the notes and actions from the recent Bletchley Park AI user group committee meeting? Now, this was a meeting that I had on Microsoft Teams where we recorded and transcribed the meeting so that we could ask Copilot questions throughout and after. That is something to be aware of, that you do have to record and transcribe the meeting. I believe there's functionality being released very, very soon that will allow you to only transcribe that meeting rather than record and transcribe it. So check that out. I think that was announced at Build, and that will be coming soon. You don't need to record the meeting anymore, but you do need to transcribe the meeting. Now, straight away, you can see Copilot responding with a summary of the notes and actions from the recent Bletchley Park AI User Group Committee meeting. Now, you can see some notes to begin with, and we can see that we discussed the feedback from the previous event, venue options for future events, the hackathon that's going on in August at Microsoft Enfield, the vision and goals for the group, the marketing subcommittee, and the rebranding of our logo. And then Copilot continued to tell us some different things that happened in that meeting, but we also then have a bunch of different actions that are assigned to different people. Now, I can see for me, I've got to go ahead and create promotional content for the Bring a Friend initiative and to contact schools in September to invite students in sixth forms and colleges to the events. Now, a bunch of different people that were in the call have also got other actions that Copilot was able to summarize for me. So I don't need to run through perhaps an hour-long recording to figure out what I needed people to do from that meeting, what I needed to do from that meeting. I can now ask Copilot to summarize that different content from a meeting that was perhaps 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now, let's say that you're not overly familiar with Copilot for Microsoft 365 yet, and you're still getting to grips with how to actually use it and get the most benefit out of it. Now, you can see that we've got 6 different examples of how we might prompt Copilot here. Now, when I say prompt, that's effectively what we're typing into this box, right? It's what we're asking Copilot to do. Now, I would very, very strongly recommend anyone that's using Copilot or Copilot for Microsoft 365 to go away and start to look at some different Learn articles and things like that around prompting. They exist, they're out there. Google prompting, Google large language model prompting, Google prompting for Copilot for Microsoft 365 or for Microsoft Copilot. There are some really, really great benefits out of being really, really good at prompting. And part of the art to working with something like Copilot for Microsoft 365 is actually just understanding how we can best get it to do what we want it to do. That being said, there's also a balance, right? This is a natural language product, and it's very, very early in the days of using large language models and things like that, which is why it's really, really great to be on the right side of being good at prompting. But this will get easier as time goes on as well. Now, let's say you're still not overly familiar with how to use Copilot and how to prompt. You can actually see some examples with the 6 that were originally on the screen, or by selecting a view prompts to head over to Copilot Lab. Now, Copilot Lab will just give you a bunch of different prompts that Microsoft have predefined for you to get you familiar with what Copilot for Microsoft 365 can do. Now, I'm going to select this one right here. Suggest 10 compelling titles based on and /. Now, what does the / do? Okay, so let's dive into this concept. Now, we said that Copilot for Microsoft 365 was able to access all of that data that exists in the Microsoft Graph, our files, meetings, emails, different people in our organization. We just saw how it could take a meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago and summarize notes and actions from that meeting. Now, what I can do here is I can get it to interact with the files that I have access to too. Now, we're currently running through this session on powerful digital solutions using contextual data with Microsoft Graph, Copilot, and Power Platform. I want Copilot to suggest 10 compelling titles based on the deck that I'm running through today that we could have perhaps used instead. Let's see what it comes up with. So it's going to take a look at the document that I gave it, the PowerPoint that we're working with, and straight away it's going to suggest 10 compelling titles based on the content in that PowerPoint presentation. Now, this could be a Word document, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be an Excel file, it could be a bunch of different things, right? It could be that Copilot is looking at video content. But this is really, really cool, right? If I'm perhaps not the most creative person, I now have an AI assistant that can help me out with those different scenarios. This is really, really helpful. Now, let's just dive back to some content quickly. Now, we've spoken around how we can use Copilot, how it interacts with the data that already exists in our tenant in Microsoft Graph, those meetings and different things like that. But perhaps now let's discuss a couple of different scenarios that we might approach with Copilot and some of the different levels of investment that we can perhaps look at when we're building out different scenarios. Now, the way that Microsoft look at some of this is with 4 different steps. Start, buy, extend, and build. Now, the first step into generative AI and working with Microsoft Copilot is really just that free version, right, that exists, that was previously known as Bing Chat, that is now just Microsoft Copilot for the web. Or perhaps it's Copilots that exist with your seeded Microsoft 365 license, where you have a Copilot alongside different products now. Perhaps it's that you have a Power Apps license, or you're working in developer environments in the Power Platform, and you're using Copilot to build Power Apps. That Copilot, you get out the box. You don't have to pay anything additional for that Copilot, so you don't have to make any additional investment specifically for that functionality. Now, the stuff that you build with Copilot for Power Apps, yes, you do need a license to share with other users and things like that, because it builds it on Dataverse. That being said, there are a bunch of different Copilots that exist with the licenses that you will already have in different Microsoft products in the Microsoft Cloud, that you can use to get familiar with Copilot and as your first step into generative AI. Now, the next step is perhaps taking a look at Copilot for Microsoft 365. It's whether we would, get any advantage out of having a Copilot that can take advantage of our productivity data in Microsoft 365. And that's the second level of investment and the second step in terms of scenarios that we could approach Copilot with. And that is the investment into Copilot for Microsoft 365. It's that step against buying a Copilot license. And that's some of the stuff that we just looked at, right? Working with Copilot for Microsoft 365, summarizing meetings, different prompts around perhaps suggesting titles for content that we've already got in SharePoint or OneDrive. But then perhaps we might want to take things another step further. Now, we talked about some of the data that Copilot has already got access to, but it won't have access to everything, right? Copilot doesn't know everything that is going on in the world and that is going on in our digital ecosystems, but we can tell it about some of that stuff. And that's what we do with the third step, extend. And that's where we can tailor our data systems and workflows via Copilot extensions. We can build in extensions to Copilot, perhaps to things like Jira, to perhaps things like Azure DevOps and Microsoft To Do, or third-party platforms, where Copilot now knows about that information because we worked on some of those extensibility options. And finally, we have the capability with the fourth level of effort to actually build our own custom Copilots with things like Copilot Studio, Teams Toolkit, or Azure AI Studio. So we have 4 different effort levels for scenarios that we might approach when we're thinking about Copilot. Now, we have Dave here. Dave is a marketing manager at Contoso, and we're just going to run through quickly a day in the life of a marketing manager at Contoso. Now, this scenario level that we just looked at is level 2. It's buy. It's having Copilot for Microsoft 365 without any extensibility, and we're not looking at any perhaps custom Copilots that we're building from the ground up. So at 8 a.m., Dave has missed an important product launch meeting and he needs to learn what happened. So we already looked at that, right? In Copilot for Microsoft 365, we gave Copilot a prompt and we asked it to summarize meeting content from a session a couple of weeks ago at the Bletchley Park AI user group. And that's exactly what Dave is doing here. He missed an important product launch meeting and he needs to learn what happened. So he's going to ask Copilot what decisions were made in the meeting, were there any disagreements on the decisions, and list the pros and cons for each of the decisions from that session. And Dave will get a very, very quick summary back that tells him all of the key information he needed to know about that meeting. Now at 8:30, Dave's already received more than 200 emails in the day. So he asks Copilot to quickly summarize all of the information he has about the project. He says, summarize my emails from the past few days that mention this project, organize the topics in a table with columns for topic, update, and action items. And Copilot can do that. It can take content from various places in Microsoft 365 in your documents and other places, and it will extract that and even put it into an organized table. So you can see already, we're not going to dive through every single step here, but you can see how some of the things that Dave may struggle with on a day-to-day basis and may take a long time to do is now supercharged by Copilot taking over those simple actions and tedious processes for him. But there's a further level we can go to, right? That was the buy stage. We had the extend stage as well. Now, let's talk about some of the ways that we can extend Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now we have a whole bunch of different things that we can do in terms of extensibility for Copilot for Microsoft 365. We've already talked about Microsoft Graph and the ability to ingest data into Microsoft 365 and Graph to enhance different graph experiences. And we use graph connectors for that. That's where we index that data, we pull it into Microsoft 365, and we enhance different experiences like Microsoft Search and Copilot for Microsoft 365. The next capability we have is more pro dev focused, and it's with Teams message extensions where we may have even been building these in the past, but we can now use them to extend Copilot for Microsoft 365. And all of the apps that you have in Teams are now extensions to Copilot as well. Then we have Copilot Studio plugins for any of our low-code friends. So people like me that are very familiar with Power Platform, that is where we can extend Copilot for Microsoft 365 from a low-code sense. Any of you that may have been previously familiar with Power Virtual Agents, that is now what Copilot Studio is, with a bunch of enhanced functionality and AI infusion. Then we have API plugins, which is currently in private preview. So check out some of the Learn docs and things like that to see where that's sort of at. But some of the additional functionality we also have coming up soon is declarative copilots in context or in focus. So we have the ability to build custom copilots and see them in almost like their siloed experience where we just talk about that topic. But we can also then use them in context as a plugin or an extension, which is really, really cool. We can have those two different experiences that we toggle between. So let's take a look at a day in the life of a marketing manager again. And Mio is a marketing manager at Contoso, but there's something different about Mio's day where we actually have to step up to a scenario level of extend. And at 10 a.m., Mio uses plugins made in Copilot Studio, where Copilot provides a list of active campaigns, pulling data from their email marketing platform. Then Mio uses Copilot in Excel to prepare charts that show data trends based on some of that data that Copilot collected. Now, what's really, really cool there is Copilot pulled data from an external platform that we integrated it with using plugins made in Copilot Studio to enhance that user experience and accelerate the speed at which Mio could enhance his workflow. Now, instead of having to go to that email marketing platform, export data, perhaps then bring it into Excel, then ask Copilot to build out charts that show data trends, instead, Copilot did the full workflow because we extended Copilot with plugins made in Copilot Studio. So that's some of the stuff really quickly that shows what we can do with Copilot extensibility. Now, we won't touch, hugely on this so much longer, but Microsoft Graph Connectors allows organizations to index data from external data enterprise data sources to enhance Microsoft 365 experiences, such as Microsoft Search and Copilot, right? We've talked about this quite a lot. There's many out-of-the-box connectors that include things like Box, Google Drive, Jira, and Salesforce, but we also have the ability to build our custom Microsoft Graph connectors with .NET. Now, we're going to jump into extending Microsoft Copilot with Microsoft 365 for Microsoft 365 with connector actions in Copilot Studio. So this is the low-code element to extensibility, right? So let's just jump into this very quickly. We will take a look at some of the things that we can do with low-code extensibility for Copilot. So I'm in Copilot Studio here. Now, if anyone wants to access this, you can go to copilotstudio.microsoft.com, where you can build custom copilots or extend Microsoft copilots that you're subscribed to. So I'm going to go ahead and select Copilot for Microsoft 365 here. This is the one that we want to work with today. Now, we're going to do a very, very simple extensibility exercise here with Copilot Studio, and we are going to build an action that will let us call external data that already actually exists in the Microsoft Cloud in Microsoft To Do, and we're going to do this with a connector action. So I select that button to create a new action, and the next thing I can do is select from 4 different types of actions that I can create. I can use a connector, I can use conversational actions, prompt actions, or a flow in Power Automate. I'm going to select a connector. Now, what's really, really cool about this, and it's something that we discussed really early on in the first session, is that Copilot Studio has the ability to use the 1,000 plus connectors that already exist in the Power Platform to now extend Copilot for Microsoft 365. It's fantastic. We have 1,000 plus different services and data points that we can use, with a bunch of additional actions that then exist underneath those connectors to get a hold of the right information that we need to extend Copilot. Now, I'm going to select Microsoft To Do for Business here, and we can see we get an action name and a description. If this isn't already so well built out, I would spend some good time writing out the description of what this connector will do, because that will be what Copilot uses to determine when to call this plugin. We're going to select next, and I would suggest putting this in a solution if you're building for production scenarios or actual development scenarios. And then we get the number of different actions that we would already be able to use in things like Power Apps or Power Automate that we can now select to configure for our plugin action. Now, there's an action in here that exists to list all to-dos. I'm going to use that one and then select next. Then what we would do is we would dive through here and work through the input parameters and output parameters. And we would describe each of these parameters so Copilot knows the data that it's working with, right? Because the description of a property isn't always enough. So we need to give it an additional description, or the name isn't always enough. So that we need to give it an additional description so that natural language, large language model understands the data that it's working with. Then once we've done this, we will go ahead and click next and then publish this. I've already got an action that's created, and we're going to take a look at that quickly here. The reason that I say that we're going to look at one that I've already created is because what you will find is sometimes when you publish actions that you create in Copilot Studio for Microsoft Copilots, they can take a little while to actually get to Microsoft Copilot. So we sped that process up. And let's just give this a moment and check out what we've got going on here. So if I scroll down, you can see that I have this Microsoft To Do for Business custom connector that's already built and ready to use in Copilot for Microsoft 365. If I go ahead and select this, we will see that I have the Microsoft To Do Business connector. And if we give it a couple of seconds, what it will tell us is that this is published in Copilot for Microsoft 365, and we'll be able to see some of the details and things that it can do, different operations as well. Now, let's head back over to Copilot for Microsoft 365. And this is really, really key, right? I said earlier that we need to remember where we're using Copilot for Microsoft 365. Now, if we head over to Microsoft365.com and prompt Copilot from there, we're perhaps not going to be able to take advantage of the extension that we've just built with Copilot Studio. But if we do things in Teams, that's where we're going to be able to take advantage of the extensibility options at this time in Copilot's rollout. So I have this little icon that exists down here for plugins. Now, I can turn on the different plugins that I've got access to use in this little pop-up box here. So I've got this one for Microsoft To Do Business, and that's turned on. And I'm going to say to Copilot, list or catch me up on the things I've set myself in to do. So Copilot's going to take a look through the different things in Microsoft Graph, and then it's also going to go ahead and check out my plugin. What you'll see is if I hover over these little 1 icons here, 2, 3, 4, it's going to basically show me what it's referenced to pull out that piece of content. And if you can see here, I'm hovering over this number 1, and you can see it's pulling out of the Microsoft To Do for Business connector. This is actually it calling my extensibility plugin to then surface the data that I need. And you can see I have a couple of things on my to-do list. I need to share upcoming user group events with the Bletchley Park AI user group community. Everyone that's subscribed to Bletchley Park, check that out. It will be coming soon. And then I have another pending task to write a new blog post on Copilot extensibility on lewisdoes.dev. So Copilot actually pulls that content out of to-do now that I've built an extension for it, where it didn't do that before. And it can use this different data contextually as well. Now, if we scroll down, there's some other places that Copilot pulled data from as well. Here it found some stuff in a PowerPoint that may have been helpful, and it will show you those references as well. We can expand this out and see a number of different places that it pulled data from, including chats. It's pulled some content from my chat with Kat here, as well as the Microsoft To-Do extensibility connector that I just created. So that's some of the stuff that we can do with like literally no time when we're building with Copilot Studio and some of the extensibility options that we have for Copilot. Now, let's just dive back into content quickly. Now, that's pretty much going to cover off this series, right? We've covered so much. We talked through Power Platform to begin with. We looked at a level 100 introduction to Power Platform and working with building with Power Apps, Power Platform, calling connectors, the 1,000+ connectors that exist out the box, and calling APIs. Then we jumped into session 2, where we talked about the concepts around contextualized data and Microsoft Graph. And we looked at how we can enhance user experiences with some of that contextualized data and how that's really, really powerful and impactful. Then we moved on to Power Platform and Microsoft Graph as better together friends. And we looked at how some of those things together are really, really powerful in building some of our own experiences with nothing but low code, natural language, and things like that. And then today we wrapped up and we brought everything together with a bit of Copilot as well. And we looked at some of the extensibility options for Copilot and how we can use contextualized data in those manners. So that's going to be everything for this series. As I say, scan that QR code, connect with me after this session if you've got any follow-up questions to some of the stuff that we've already put in the chat. Check out my link tree. If you're not able to scan the QR code, connect with me on LinkedIn or X, or subscribe on lewisdoes.dev, and we will stay in touch. Other than that, I will hand back over to you, Anna.